For the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh. All right. Thank you for coming today for this special meeting of the Board of Selectmen. This was a meeting that was postponed from last week when our normally scheduled meeting was due to vacation week. First up, we've had a couple resignations on Affordable Housing Commission, Mark Foreman, and then from the Police and Fire Retirement Board, Joseph Regiglioso. And to my associates on the board, we'll confirm that. Even though Joseph was a Democrat, I believe it might be open to a Democrat and unaffiliated or Republican based on the current makeup of that board, but we will confirm that and get that back out to you. Next up, item 4, Elizabeth Jones, who was an alternate, has now been appointed as a full-time member of the Conservation Commission. And again, I believe that gives us 3 openings at alternate. So any party affiliation would be appropriate at this point. So if you have any suggestions, please pass those along. All right, next up, land acquisition. This item was postponed from an earlier meeting, actually a couple of earlier meetings, I think. The item is to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolved that the town of Fairfield acquire the property at 2012 Cross Highway, approximately 1.19 acres from the state of Connecticut at the cost of $1,000. May I have a move to accept?
So moved.
A second.
For discussion purposes.
Okay. All right. Discussion's open. Do we want to have any follow-up from Mr. Stank or anybody, or do we want to go right into discussion?
Well, I thought we were supposed to get an update from State Representative Fawcett in regards to her efforts with the state of Connecticut in removing those restrictions on the deed.
Yeah, it's,
I can probably speak to that. I've
Okay.
emailed back and forth over a few times. Oh,
if you could.
excuse me, yes, I'd be
And,
happy to do that.
and Tish, you'd be kind enough to identify yourself, name and address, and...
Yes, Tisha Ferguson, Chair of Land Acquisition, I've region that all of it. I have emailed had a few exchanges with Kim Fawcett, and I had not heard back from her directly about the questions that were raised last meeting. So I did go ahead and contact the DOT directly myself, and I spoke with Terry Obie, who is the person there in charge of disposition of land for DOT, and asked him a number of questions that had been raised about the quitclaim in the terms of the contract, specifically the very last line, which says that the state can reclaim the land at no cost at any time that they feel it's in their interest. That was language, according to Terry Obie, specifically put in the contract because of the state statute that was passed, which started the whole process of the DOT divesting of excess land. And it was put in there for the purpose of cost saving should they need to reclaim that land, not to imply that they have any particular intent to do so. The entire process of disposing of these excess parcels is actually part of the cost-saving initiative for all the state agencies. And that was his explanation of why that particular line was at the end of the contract. And it is their intent to have it be kept as open space. It's also, he mentioned to me that if the town does not choose to accept this land, it is their intent to come back and seek a building, to have it get a variance for building, because that is their contention that because the state purchased this land prior to zoning regulation of the town of Fairfield, that it should be grandfathered, and so that's an open question. But I thought you would be interested to hear that.
No, thank you.
Okay, so that's the information I have on that in that regard.
Yeah, it just, even though it's third hand, or I don't know what the legal term is, Mr. Walsh, you're saying, I did talk to Ms. Fawcett. She did get back to me and say that the state would not be changing the language. That is the standard way that they have addressed this type of disposition
Right,
contract or
exactly.
agreement all the way through. So
That was my
disappointed to
understanding.
hear that, but that confirms what you said. Thank you for going
Right.
the extra effort
Sure.
of talking directly to folks at
Absolutely.
DOT.
And I think Tom has a couple of other pieces of information for you.
Mr. Stanky, would
The board asked for information from the police department, engineering department regarding the accident history of the area, as well as...
Tom, if you could, to the extent you can, speak into the mic at the podium, or
beg your
perhaps hand stuff out and then speak.
Tom Stanky, Conservation Director, Town of Fairfield.
Just
I'll pass it out, Tom.
Just distribute these to...
our friends on Fair TV can hear
Thank you.
what's being said.
I guess a graphic summary. There's been two, the police department indicate that there are accident history for cars. There are two at the area. One in 2009 where two cars took a simultaneous left-hand turn and collided in the middle of the intersection. In 2010, in December, the car was running north on Sturgis, hit reported a black ice patch, and went into the trees. It's about 500 feet south of the Merritt Parkway. Those are the only two that we found in the area from the police department.
Okay, just to clarify, those seem to take place away from the subject property?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the subject property is this is a 1.19 acre property involved. This is Cross Highway, Sturgis Highway coming down. The 2009, that was May 25th. The car coming down Sturgis Highway had stopped. The car coming east on Cross went to make a left-hand turn. The gentleman driving at number 1, after he stopped, he pulled out to go left onto Cross, and he said the sun was in his eyes, and they had a fender bender here. This car in December 2010, running at 3 a.m. in the morning, hit the black ice, hit the trees, bounced off, rolled over, and came to a stop in the middle of the road. That was a single person, one car, one driver. No injuries in either. The second item is the engineering department's recommendation for parking, and Mr. Hurley indicated that in concept it was something similar to the parallel parking on Brookside Drive Park. It's for two cars. He has a 55-foot long by 16-foot wide parking area. He would go to 3 cars, could be accommodated. There's a 120-foot section right here that has the access to the lot. And out of that 120 feet, the existing gravel parking area is 120 long, 22 wide, and it could easily accommodate the 2 vehicles that were proposed. We suggested if you wanted to go to 3, that would fit without any problem by extending the length to 60 feet by 20, and it could conceivably go to 4 as well within that 120-foot area. He indicated that you could also have off-street parking into the property, but he recommended against it for unnecessary disturbance. And if you look at these photos, this is the first is from east of the property, looking west on across the street, looking west on Cross Highway, and the town property line is this boulder here. The 120 feet extends down to the stones in the grass behind my vehicle, and the site distance is 250 feet from the present. It goes to 300 if you move it further east up to the stone wall, the stone boulder here. I see no need to do that. We have a little mailbox post at this point in front of the cars, and that could be relocated. It's just a post. But engineering feels that there's no need to relocate the existing parking section as it fits within the 120-foot section as permitted by the state. This is the view of the same day looking from west toward the east up along the property. This last is of the intersection of Sturgis Highway coming down to the stop bar on the left, looking east on Cross. And you may note that the border of the property is It's a series of stone wall sections. Of the 300 feet, there's one 52-foot section that has no wall, is open. It's the barnyard entrance. And the other is a 10-foot wide section down here that is open to the old dwelling, to the cellar hole. You see that, again, as I indicated at the last meeting, I would anticipate that we would provide a gate at the 52-foot section, close up the 10-foot, and we would be within security area for inappropriate access as provided by the DOT.
Just to clarify your earlier point, you talked about 250 or 300 feet of view.
Sightline.
Sightline.
Yes.
Where does, I mean, the cars are way up there from where you're talking.
That's correct.
Where does
The
that
cars
sightline, does that
through
sightline
the
go to here?
trees, that comes down here, yes. That 200 feet, 250 feet goes before the bend. That's, if you were at the parking area where the cars are, you can see them through the trees. That would be the distance,
So in
the
essence,
sight distance, SIGHT,
After-
that the driver would have.
after navigating the bend, I would then have 300 feet or so of
Approximately.
sight. Okay.
You see that?
Great photo work, Mr. Spank. Great photo work,
Oh,
thank you.
thank you. Pictures help.
Do you want to see these again?
Yeah, I'd like to see that again. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Stank, anything further to add?
I'm sorry, any questions? I beg your pardon?
Any questions from the board?
So I guess I have a couple questions. So the proposal would be to put 2 parking spaces, not 3?
The proposal is to leave the parking configuration the way it is. Mr. Hurley found that it didn't need any surface improvements. It was 22 feet wide at the present time from the 55, his design is, it's a trapezoidal section that is 55 feet long and 16 wide, which fits within the existing conditions. Said if the town did acquire it and wish to go to 3, he would recommend that it be lengthened to a 60-foot by 20-foot wide pull-off area. And if the town acquired it, the town has the option up to 120 feet to provide the pull-off.
Is there an estimate on how much it would cost to lengthen the parking area to make room for more spots?
It's, no, well, there would be, we'd have to move the post office box, the mailbox of the gentleman across the street. He did not give me a figure for that. It would be digging a 2-3 foot hole, perhaps foot in the ground, 2 feet, concrete footing, would not be very expensive.
Okay. And the estimation, I think, for, you said you wanted to put up a fence?
Should have a gate, fence rail where there's no stone wall. That's the 52 feet of the barnyard entrance, and also it should be closed in at the 10-foot entrance to the old dwelling house. No dwelling house there now. It's the cellar hole.
Just to clarify, is that directly across from the cars, is that why we can't see it? Where's the 50-foot opening?
Starts from here, end of the stones, and then it does go behind the house, the car.
So that's the end of the stone wall there.
That's the 52 feet,
I see that.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
That's the end of the stone wall, that's the opening of the front.
That's the first section with no dark coloring right here. This is behind the cars, as you look at it in the photo views. And the stone wall and trees come down here to a 10-foot section right here.
Where is that property line?
Property line is at the boulder.
Okay, and that's
In that-
which,
in
is that
view,
this boulder?
Right there, yes,
By the driveway?
correct.
See that? That boulder?
And that's the driveway of the other neighbor.
That's the joke? Correct.
So his driveway is effectively right on the property line.
The apron sweeps across the state property.
Okay.
Yes.
And the cost to clean up the property, to put up the fencing that you need to put up, to remove that pile of manure, and to clean the property is,
Clean the
it's
captive
$1,000.
well, I-
And the captive well is all $1,000.
Yes, correct.
Wow.
Is that, just to be clear, you're using some existing labor that, seasonal labor that would come on and work to help?
This would be our seasonal.
So that's $1,000 out of pocket?
That's correct. Well, it'll be we're going to have to pay for if the town acquired the conveyance to the state, the DOT requires $1,000 there as
Okay.
well.
To Mr. Walsh's question, that's $1,000, just for the cleanup, $1,000 out of pocket, plus the seasonal labor that you already have kind of budgeted for within it.
That's correct.
So that would be, the total out-of-pocket cost
Two,
would be $2,000, one for the acquisition price to the state.
for the state, and the other for the town, seasonal crew.
The capping's gonna be done with the stone of this 15-foot deep well?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay. A stone? How big of a stone does that stick?
Well,
I
something
haven't seen
over
the
3
well.
feet in diameter, I would estimate perhaps 5, it probably weighed 500 to 700 pounds.
Okay.
Any questions?
Just the last time we met, first of all, thank you for the additional information. And the last time we met, I just want to kind of be clear on your opinion about the town acquiring this and your support of this and or where you stand on what we as a town would benefit from or what the downsides would be. I mean, my understanding is that you're in support of this, and just confirm
I
that.
endorse it, yes. I've been here a long time, and I've seen a lot of opportunities lost because the town couldn't afford, things didn't converge to get the job done. And we look back after a few decades and can see that, maybe if we had done something a little different or looked a little harder, it could have been achieved. And I see this, and other properties that are coming up. When the opportunity presents itself, I think it's worth recognizing it, accepting it.
Thank you.
Any other comments before we go to the public? We'll come back to the board after. for
Sure.
comments. Okay.
Mhm.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, we're back to the board. Any further comments from the board or further discussion before we take a vote?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be able to support it for a number of different reasons. I still think there's a safety issue. I also have issues with the fact that we are basically going to be taking the state of Connecticut's property, an expense that they have on their side, both on a liability side and on a maintenance side for debris that comes off the highway. And we now become responsible for those things. If someone gets hurt on that property, they sue the town of Fairfield. If there's debris that's thrown out the windows from the Merritt Parkway, well, we're going to probably clean that up probably quarterly, I think you said the last time. We'd have a kind of a quarterly cleanup.
Yes, if the town acquired the property.
Yep.
We would not be going on the right-of-way for the Merritt Park.
But anything else that comes onto the property, whatever debris comes on the
Most of the
property.
debris is from the state, on the state's property adjacent to this lot.
So there's no debris on the property other than the mountain of manure that's there right now?
That's the primary, that's the big problem, yes.
Okay. I just don't see the benefit that we get for having to maintain the state's property, basically, and to pay for it. And at any point in time, whether that be this year, or whether that be 200 years from now, they can take the property back and say, thanks for taking care of it, we're going to take it back now, for no cost whatsoever. They charge us $1,000 to make the conveyance happen. But when we have to convey it back, they don't pay our conveyance fees, from what I can see, back to them. They just take it based on a deed restriction in the quitclaim deed that they've provided us. And then I've also analyzed it from the opposite side, that being the worst-case scenario. Number one, the state's already come to our zoning board of appeals. Prior to coming to us, they did go to the zoning board of appeals and tried to get a variance on this property to try to turn it into a building lot, and were completely turned down. It was a unanimous vote. At that point, organizations like the Greenfield Hill Village Improvement showed up and others to object against it. So they'd have to come back. They're threatening, I guess, from what I've heard, this Mr. Obie has advised us that they will try to do it again, which I think will be a difficult road to hoe. But even if they did, and they were successful, we would have a house on a piece of property that's slightly less than 2 acres. That would bring the town, based on the normal size house someone would build on that property, about $20,000 plus in tax revenues. That would be the biggest negative for the town, is that we'd have a house up there, a single-family residence, and we'd be making about $20,000 a year on it. Based on all that, I have a hard time seeing why we need it. I spoke to John Jones, the president of the Greenfield Hill Village Improvement Society, because Ms. Fawcett said, kind of used their name. She didn't say that they took an official position. He said that they do not have an official position. Yes, they objected to that variance being granted, but they also understood that the state was unwilling to give up that deed restriction, and they thought that that was an important part, and they could not understand why the state would, not just give it to the town. He said if they would give it to the town, he would definitely more strongly support this, but the fact that it could be reverted at any point in time, they were not taking a position on it. Based on all that, I can't support it. I think the risks and cost outweigh the benefits of this, and let the state continue to maintain it. It's going to stay the way it is. If they want to file for a zoning variance, we let that process take its course, and either it stays the way it is, and the state can have access to their property anytime they want, just like they could if we took it over and paid them money and continue to maintain it, or if they're successful getting a variance, we'll have another single-family residence on a 2-acre piece of property and make $20,000+ worth of tax revenue. That's my position, so I won't be able to support this.
Okay. Kristen, did you have anything to
Yeah, I
say at
guess
this time?
just to offer a different perspective in terms of liability and risk and taking on additional liability. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the fact that every time we build a sidewalk in town, we take on additional liability for trip and falls. And so thinking about that in terms of the big picture liability, I don't think it's a huge assumption of risk. I recognize there is some, but the cost of the cleanup is a cost. We're being told $2,000 is essentially what we're looking at. And while it's a cost, it's definitely not one that is a significant cost in the scheme of what we're looking at compared to some of the other things that we do. I think the deed restriction issue is frustrating. I don't disagree with that. I think that the state is, as the DOT expressed, just trying to cover themselves in the event that they do need that land back. My feeling is if the state wanted that land back, whether there was a deed restriction or not, they would take that land back if it were for transportation purposes related to something with the parkway or a need that they had. I hear the argument about having a single-family home that's kind of the worst-case scenario. And no, I don't think that that's the worst thing that could happen. However, I look at what Mr. Stanky is saying in terms of that long-term, broader view. And while it may not be active recreation or something that many people even use at all, I think having open space in and of itself is valuable to our town and important to the bigger picture. So to me, ideally, we wouldn't have this deed restriction piece to deal with. That would be just a much better scenario. But this is the offer that we're being given, and this is a yes or no at this point, as far as we know. We don't have any other information to say. We've been told, essentially, this is it. This is where the state's coming from. So because of the fact that it's not a huge cost, the cost is not significant, and because of the fact that I do think that there is value in, as Mr. Stenke said, taking advantage of the opportunity when it's being offered. I think that that space provides a nice buffer to the highway. As the First Selectman said last time, it's a gateway to our community, and I'm inclined at this point to actually support this item.
Okay. Thank you. I guess just a couple thoughts before we vote. This is one of those items that frankly, there's some arguments on either side. Certainly, Mr. Walsh makes some good ones about, in fact, I think we all agree on the fact that it would be nicer if we didn't have the deed restriction. The idea of the state saying, hey, give this, as Ms. Ferguson found out, they're pretty open about just wanting to reduce their maintenance costs. Given the state of the property, it doesn't sound like they've spent any maintenance costs coming down here, checking it out, or anything. So I'm not sure we'll see a reduction in our state income tax anytime soon if the town were to take this on. If they were fortunate enough to get a zoning waiver, certainly there would be some tax revenue to the town. There'd also be some costs on that side. If I were looking to the state to be fair, it would be like, hey, we might keep our deed restriction, but it'd be really nice if they said, look, we'll reimburse you for any costs that you've put into this over the years if we proceed to come in and take it back. Somewhere in this, you have to look at the probability of something happening. As much as the state is saying they might take it, continue to take it before the ZBA to get it, I agree with Mr. Walsh's point that it's not likely that the ZBA anytime soon might concede that, but one never knows. I think from the state standpoint, just taking this piece of property back doesn't serve any function unless they were taking a lot more land around this to develop another exit or entrance to the parkway. And certainly then we might lose part of our no exit zone. I think that I guess I come back to that we don't get that many chances to purchase open space. I think that land it gets increasingly valuable, that this is a $2,000 expenditure. I would look to Mr. Stenke and his department to realize that if we do go forward with this, we don't get reimbursed for any costs. So I'd really be looking at you to minimize any investment we make in this and keep that to a minimum. And what I'm hearing you say is you believe you can absorb that kind of within the kind of labor content that you already have in your budget, and you don't see any expenses really cropping up beyond that. And I think that's important to stick to that. All that being said, it's I guess I'd be leaning towards supporting this for just those reasons, and the opportunity to acquire some additional open space and keep it in the town's hands, and basically at least enhance one of the gateways to our town with that. But I think there are valid points being made on both sides of that discussion. So with that, I would call for a vote at this time.
I have a question for Mr. Stenke.
Please
Mr.
go ahead.
Stenke, these pictures were taken recently?
Yes,
So that's grass from this spring, right?
that's correct.
Okay, so you officially, once we take over this thing, you guys take over the grass mowing on that right away, right?
As far as I know, if it grew, yes. If it remains in its present state, then it would not require it. What you're looking at is the grass coming in.
Looking like this all the way down to here. I mean, it looks green to me.
Yeah, grass coming in here and you're beneath the trees, I do not see that is requiring. We do in open space. When you have a condition, this is the parking area I'm talking about. I would not anticipate mowing anything beyond the stones down here. That's thatch, if you will. The area that we would anticipate parking on is the area where the cars are going.
So you put a property like this on your rotation of your lawn mowing, or how does that work?
We'd have to wait to see whether or not it required mowing and to what degree. The quarterly review that we would provide would include evaluating the growth of the grass to see if it needed work.
As a follow-on to Mr. Walsh's question, do we have any knowledge if the state currently mows that strip?
I do not know. From my observations of the property, I have a sense that the property was acquired in 1936. They removed the superstructures, the buildings, and left it undisturbed since that time, including maintenance. I do not see any evidence of maintenance on that property. Maintenance on the right-of-way for the Merritt Parkway coming down to the fence, no question about it. That's, you can see that there's nothing, the junk is not old. It's new pieces of fenders and cars. But that's the extent of their maintenance.
We're going to be allowing passive recreational use, like, so people can go hiking and stuff, so we're going to provide
Well,
some type of access to the property.
It would be used passively or actively to the degree that the site lends itself to those activities. It's not a clear, it's a second growth hardwood forest coming in that you can easily walk around, see through in the dormant season. But I doubt that you could see the Merritt from the road during the growing season. Dense foliage.
But so you basically, to rephrase that again, you're talking about making it safe by removing the manure. I'm going to say capping the well.
Cap the well, secure it, yes. Putting up the cedar rail.
But beyond that,
rail, and that's,
there are no plans, and that would kind of stay within the guideline of minimal investment.
that is correct. If someone or some neighborhood group or association, what have you, thought that it could be improved with more wildflowers than are found there today, that would be consistent with that activity.
Okay. All right.
I would just like to point out that if we do move forward with this, we are still adding on to Mr. Stanky's acreage that he has to cover in his budget of open space, of the hundreds of acres that he has to cover. And at some point, although he has staff, he's saying he can cover this in his current budget. You know, when we add on to that, we have to take into account that it does come with a cost. It does come with a time consumption of human labor that we're paying. And at some point, that human labor has to be increased. And so nothing comes with no cost. So that's it. I'm all set. I'm ready to vote.
All right. Kristen?
I'll give credit to Ms. Carpenter, who pointed out that if this is going forward, the letter from the state DOT asks to please sign both copies of the closing report, and wondering if the resolution needs an amendment to give the first selectman the ability to sign such, or if that's properly assumed by the resolution as it is written.
One of those amendments, I could argue away on it, says that the town will acquire it. So certainly that says the intent is to take the actions necessary to acquire it, but if you feel more comfortable with an amendment, we can.
I'm fine just raising that as a point. I'm
Is that
comfortable.
cause you any
No,
concern
no,
if
that's
the
fine.
motion were to go that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine.
All right, we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yeah, can I just ask one question? I don't know if you talked to the town already. Does the RTM have to approve this?
I believe,
Yes.
yes.
Does TPZ have to approve this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Stanky in his letter to us said it goes to TP&Z and then the RTM after us.
That's correct.
Okay, and then in any open space, the RTM designates the use for that open space, correct?
Or not.
Or not?
Could be undesignated.
They can be
As-
doing it as designated.
As we, it gets back to parcels and it went back to,
If
you
it
know, we'll
is
designate it
undesignated,
for
it would
active.
default to the Conservation
Active
Commission.
and passive. I think that until as I remember from our experience with Parcells,
Mhm.
until Parks and Rec stood up and said, we want to put a ball field there,
Mhm.
it was in the hands of conservation as.
Yes.
For their management. It wasn't designated open space, but it was, for lack of a better term, unassigned property that,
Undesignated, correct.
so under that, somebody has to manage it, it goes to the conservation department. But I think there were issues with, at the time, we didn't have a use to be approved.
Mm-hmm.
So the RTM wasn't going to assign it to a department at the same time that they were approving the acquisition. So it was a two-step process. Approve the acquisition, then wait for a town use to be proposed, then get back and approve that. In the meantime,
Mm-hmm.
conservation looked after the land. Is that a fair way to say that, Mr. Stanky?
Yes.
In regards to the state conveyance, it says the state conditions of conveyance, it says the use of the parcel shall be open space purposes, open, in parentheses, open space purposes is undefined.
They did not define the
So the
term.
RTM, if the RTM
in the
decides that
legislation.
they want to have it be active open space, the RTM can do that.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Fair.
That's fair. I guess they can tear down the trees and do whatever they want with it. It's the RTM's decision.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, most likely in a two-step process, step one, acquiring, step two, somebody proposing it, because it'd have to be a department that it was assigned to do things with.
But in the past, we've done some open space with them where they've designated it right away as
Oh,
tax
it could be designated marina,
Boroughs, the boroughs
conservation
field.
park,
'Cause-
or undesignated and default to the conservation.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Burroughs Field was an example of an active parcel that was purchased with, and they designated it as active right away.
All right. Correct.
Okay.
Greenfield Farm is undesignated open space,
Mhm.
but we lease to Mr. Hayden.
Anything else before we vote?
No.
All right. Resolved that the town of Fairfield acquire the property at 2012 Cross Highway, 1.19 acres from the state of Connecticut at a cost of $1,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Stanky, thank you again for your additional presentation.
Thank you.
And did you get all your handouts back?
Wish.
All right. Next up, Riverfield School Building Committee. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution requested by the Riverfield School Building Committee. Resolved that the bond appropriation entitled "A Resolution Appropriating $250,000 for the costs associated with the improvement and renovation of Riverfield School and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation consisting of 3 pages, be and hereby is approved." May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
For discussion purposes.
Okay. Is anyone here to present some background on this? Mr. Quinn, did you have anything to add to the board beyond what...
I'm Tom Quinn, 88 Myron Street, Fairfield, Connecticut, and currently the chairman of the Riverfield Building Committee. Yeah, we are recommending the $250,000, and that was predicated on basis of past experience, nothing that we know of directly. Okay, it was what was appropriated for Fairfield Woods, Stratfield School, okay, in the past. We made some minor changes in certain segments, switching some funds from one to another. Primarily, the concern was to be sure we had enough money for hazardous testing. Okay, that is a key thing that we want to be sure is covered. But everything else really was consistent with the prior experience. The data that I just received today indicates that prior estimates of $250,000 were relatively correct, okay, on the basis of the actual expenditures that I have in front of me that run from 239 to 245, okay, which is a very acceptable margin of error in any type of project. So it's really on the basis of prior.
Any discussion from the board? Yeah. Mr. Wall?
Sure. Tom, I don't know whether your board talked about, but some of the numbers I were seeing was coming in from comparisons to Stratfield Building Committee, which was a $17.5 million project, and in regards to the Fairfield Woods project, which was basically, if you guys are at somewhere between 10 and $11 million, a $24 million project, so it was twice the size. Is there a reason why, like if you were looking at Fairfield Woods at $250,000 needed, why, I don't understand why we can't bring that number in for half that amount, say $125,000?
You're doing the same testing, Jim.
Okay.
Okay? The testing remains the same. Whether or not you're going to spend 11, which, by the way, is not a fact at this point. We have not said it's going to be 11 million, 9 million. I mean, we haven't gotten anything really from the architects. You know, the RFQ just went out. So until that comes back, I'm not prepared to say it's 11. But, you know, assuming that you're even correct with the 50%, the type of testing you're doing doesn't matter on the total cost of the project.
Well, first of all, I beg to differ on one point. That 11 million, you might not be tied to it, but Mr. Morbido is tied to it. And we hired an architect before that. What was his name?
Oh, was that Wells?
No, it was.
Bill.
Bill
Phil
Cerrone,
Cerrone, who I asked professionally on basically his professional experience, would this $11 million number hold up? And he said that it would. Okay? And I think we paid him a fair amount of money to put some schematic drawings.
I think it was $5,000.
Yeah, together. So I think there's going to be a number, I mean, I can't speak for the rest of this board, but I'm going to be surprised if it comes in much more than $11 million. I mean, but you think you need the whole $250,000 despite the fact that other buildings were a lot larger?
I don't know enough to make the change, very honestly.
Okay. Twig, do you know? I mean, do you,
Sure, one at a time here, just. Okay.
he said that you didn't know, so I'm asking
Yeah, that's
Ms.
fair.
Holland.
Just through the chair to it. Ms. Holland, would you come up and address that, Mr. Walsh's question? Twig, are you okay moving around now?
I'm sorry?
Are you okay moving around now? Can you come up here to the podium?
I am, I just, oh yeah, I am. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm a little gimpy, but not terribly. Hi. Good afternoon, I'm Twig Holland, I'm Director of Purchasing for the town. Here is what I can tell you. We budgeted $250,000 for seed money for Stratfield. That was a $12 million construction project. So that was very close to what I believe Mr. Cerrone estimated for Riverfield, give or take that. Fairfield Woods, which was twice what Stratfield was, I believe, also was in the $250,000 range for the seed money. And what I can tell you is that if we don't use all that seed money, it's rolled into the rest of the project cost. So if the building committee has $50,000 left over and wants to ask for some sum for the project funding that is $50,000 less, that's always an option. It's not money that's going to be spent if it's not needed. But our preference is that we get the funding that we think we'll need based on the experience and based on the increased level of testing that some of the environmental work requires, rather than fall short.
So basically, there's no difference in size of seed money to get to schematic design drawings and to get to a cost number for the project, regardless of the size of the school project. It's basically $250,000. It doesn't matter how many square feet it is that we're looking at, it's $250,000.
Based on our past experience, that's our best estimate at that time.
I think that the point though is, again, like many bond, this is a spend up until authorization. If they don't spend this much, if they do it for $150,000, then that's all that's spent at this phase of the project. We're looking at a bond resolution that talks about financing this over 20 years. Normally, we wouldn't finance a $250,000 expenditure over 20 years. What we're really saying with this is we're going to roll it in to the cost of the project. So whatever that number is, be that 9, 10, 11, this becomes part of that, the soft costs that are built into that, and that becomes part of the overall money that we go out to bonding.
It typically is, yes.
That's if the town bodies vote to fund the whole project, based on the numbers that come back. If not, we're bonding $250,000 over 20 years, just like we approved today.
What this resolution does is give us authorization to bond.
Okay.
It is not a requirement
Mhm.
to do so. So if we spent $150,000 on this, came up with something that said, nope, no way, this is not the place to go, if something changed, the proverbial earthquake happened, I don't see us bonding $150,000 that was sunk at that point over 20 years. I see us finding another way to finance that. If you
Just to
would.
follow up Mr. Walsh's question, the standard $250,000 is for a full building or building renovation project as opposed to a windows project or a roof project? Just to clarify that.
It would be. There are some elements that are built into this funding request, same as with Stratfield or with Fairfield Woods, for some things like a geotechnical survey, a site survey, and so forth. That work would not be required if we were to do a window replacement or, actually on windows it might be, but a roof replacement, for instance. We wouldn't be doing soil borings to test for structurally suitable soil. So this is based on what we know about the project being it would require some addition and some interior renovation of the interior spaces.
Any more questions at this time, or is it okay to go to the public?
Sure.
All right. Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, back to the board.
Yes. I guess I need to talk to Tommy. Is there talk about...
Mr. Quinn, if you would come up to the podium again. Just because the microphone is here for the Fair TV folks.
That's fine.
Has there been talk in your committee in regards to using the $250,000 about whether you're going to use any of the $250,000 for architectural fees for the cost of an annex versus making it part of a main building, the extra six classrooms?
No. The educational things that we laid, guidelines that were laid out, were to get rid of, okay, the current temporary classrooms. We did not say to the architects in the RFQ whether or not it had to be an annex or part of the existing building.
Is that something you're going to explore? Because we did that, we did prefab construction of 6 classrooms at both Osborne Hill and Sherman, and that seemed to be a model that seemed to be going forward, and I think it's been successful.
We're going to be looking at their experience and what the architects come back with.
Okay.
Okay? But we know we didn't want to bias the process either. Okay? We're paying the architects good money to come up with creative ideas.
Okay. I know when this goes back, I'm going to be asking that question about that.
And we'll be ready to answer that.
So I hope the architect's ready to prepare to answer, and that it wasn't something that was...
Before you, it'll have to come through us.
So, may I?
Please.
Just follow up. I guess what I'm hearing you say is you didn't specify either way. In other
No.
words, you just said, here's what we're looking for from an ed spec perspective.
They got the ed spec, correct.
Okay, and it wasn't, please come back with an annex type idea or something that's physically
Absolutely not.
attached
We
to the
did not.
building, or okay.
The other thing I guess you should probably, when you do hire an architect, is to look at some of the things, lessons that were recently divulged to us by the Fairfield Woods Building Committee, which seemed to suggest that copper roofs were the best way to go, and that copper panels seem to be the best way to go. They seem to have done the research. They think it's the least maintenance and the cheapest option. And it's obviously something, when I asked that building committee chair whether that was the most prudent way to go, he said it was, after much exploration, and he thought we'd be seeing a lot more of it. So it's something, I guess, I'd love to hear from your architect when you come back to us about it.
We will certainly look at that.
Okay.
Though we aren't adding the auditorium that they use the copper on at Fairfield Woods, but
And we also made time, to be fair to that issue, time, and there were lots of other issues associated with that, but I think to that point, I think that what I'm hearing from the other members of the board, and I would certainly concur, is that we really want to be involved in this process and aware of the conversations you're having and how this is moving forward. And I think just looking at this money in terms of my position on voting today for the seed money is I am supporting this money and this funding today going forward. I think we've established a building committee. We need to look at the options. But I think, as I've said to every individual member of the building committee as I talk with folks and when we approved your formation, and again, thank you for your service, is that we really, will be really looking carefully, as I know that you will be, at all of this. So I do plan to support this motion. I think we need to figure out what the best options are, and we need to make sure we have adequate funding, certainly to know what we are dealing with, especially from a hazardous material standpoint.
yeah, I would say that both following both comments, Mr. Walsh's as well as Ms. McCarthy-Vahey's, one of the lessons learned out of Fairfield Woods is that if we're going to do something that might not be clearly understood in the public mind, that we want to do a better job in communication at that time, and not leave it to folks just to know that there was a public meeting of the building committee and these things were discussed and decided. I think that there certainly has been much ado made about the use of copper on Fairfield Woods. There's certainly been a number of things said that may not be fully cognizant of the facts in terms of doing that, and certainly Mr. Sapone was good enough to come before this board and take our questions on it. But I would ask you to consider is if things are going on in the committee that, again, stepping back and saying this may not be fully understood by the public, let's get the facts out to the public sooner rather than later.
I totally concur.
So,
Absolutely.
thank you for that.
Okay.
And any further questions?
Yeah, Mike, to you or to Paul Hiller, how much money is in the current waterfall right now for this project? Is there anything in there?
Yes,
For this project?
yeah,
This project?
yes and no.
How much is allocated for this project?
Yes and no. All
Okay,
right,
just
if I
want
might.
you to explain both the yes and the no.
Guess I'm going to let Mr. Hiller go first.
There are funds in the waterfall, particularly for a bond issue in 2014, for roughly, I don't have the figure right in front of me, roughly $20 million in capital projects, which would clearly envision these funds and additional funds that would be necessary for the construction of this project. So those funds are envisioned as part of the capital plan that we put forward and have reviewed with this board, the Board of Finance, and members of the RTM last two prior Septembers. And we've talked in terms of this project, some other projects with the Board of Education, and it would be within that. The $250,000 specifically, but we might put it, if it were passed, we might put it in this bond sale, because it appears right now that there's room within the bond sale for this summer for this, and to take advantage of current interest rates. That is probably not envisioned in there, but there's room within that, because we have over $38 million bond issue, which we envision this year, and we probably have room to put this in there. We might, we certainly wouldn't borrow all 250 of it, but we might borrow a portion of it.
I think that, to get back to expand on what Mr. Hiller said, when we look at the waterfall chart, that's a way of analyzing what we're spending and what we're committing to in bonding over time. There's a certain number of projects in there that have been approved. We know what the numbers are they're approved for, and those specific numbers are in there. For projects like this that haven't been approved, the no part of my response was that there's not 9.5 million in there for Riverfield because we don't know what the number is. Right? However, we did put allocations in for new bonding dollar amounts for each year going out, because the waterfall looks at a 10 to 20-year range in terms of what our, to help us calculate what our debt service will be over that time. So to the extent that we put an allocation in of money we expected to spend, and this money would come within that allocation, it is in there from a financial impact and from a dollar amount. And as we kind of put this in there, we'll reduce that available allocation for other projects. So once we find out what the full request for this project is, we'll go back and change those numbers as part of that.
So are you saying that we have up to $20 million to spend on this project?
No, not on this project. I'm saying that the waterfall envisions a bond issue in the summer of 2014 in the $20 million range, which would encompass any and all projects which might be approved
But
through the process.
to address that, to keep the math simple, if this was approved at $10 million, right, over 20 years, that's $500,000 a year. So of the allocation that's in the chart, there'd be roughly $500,000 a year that would be drawn down. That still leaves additional money.
And I might add that figure might be, we'd have to net out state aid, because this project clearly would be eligible for state aid.
Yeah, and we'd have to add in interest, and I just did the
Yeah.
math simple, because I could do the simple math.
So how do we, under the waterfall project, determine whether we can afford this project, whether it be at 10 million? What happens if the number comes in at 17 million?
The real issue there is, what else are we doing? What the waterfall chart lets us do is plan out what the debt service numbers we want to be. If this did come in at 17 million, the real question is, and let me say 20 million, again, forgive me for keeping the math simple, instead of 500,000 a year, that would be $1 million a year. That, you know, in essence, $1 million drawdown on what our annual allocation would be in the waterfall. In order to keep the debt service numbers the same, if that was our goal, we would then have to either push other projects out, so we couldn't fit them in that time, or do less over that time period. So we would manage our debt service number that way. That doesn't mean we should, you know, be happy if spending 17 or 20 million if that comes in. But it says that the waterfall chart lets us manage this among our other allocations. If it comes back and does that, and we look at the waterfall chart, given the other priorities we have away from this project, we might say put this project on hold because we don't want to spend that much money this soon.
Is there an allocation of a specific dollar amount the Board of Ed's allowed to spend on capital in like over a 5-year period of time?
Right now, it's plugged into the waterfall about $5 million a year.
$5 million.
$5 million a year, and that is beyond those funds that were also reserved for the non-recurring capital, which this clearly would not be part of. There's another $2 million allocation targeted for non-recurring projects on the Board of Education side.
And we've got 2 steps here from an education standpoint. We're going to, based on Mr. Flynn's schedule, the goal would be to get him to come in and kind of help us step through the waterfall chart as a working tool. The second, we will be doing a capital planning workshop in September and talk through some of this in more specifics. But so we'll get 2 shots. September is kind of our annual update on where it is, and as we come through, and then the session, and I'm hoping to do that probably at our second meeting in May, if that fits Mr. Walsh's schedule. Not Mr. Walsh's, sorry, Mr. Flynn's schedule. And kind of step us through that, perhaps with Mr. Mayor joining him, so we can get the benefit of both their perspectives.
So in this coming 5-year period, we're going to have this project, we're going to have the roof at Ward. Is that still going to be, that's still part of the
The
allocation?
roof at Ward is
right?
envisioned, and the significant portion of the roof at Ward is envisioned to be bonded this summer.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to perhaps jump ahead to your question, Mr. Hiller sat down with the Board of Ed finance director and reviewed their long-range plan and confirmed that that fit within the current waterfall chart allocations, and that it wouldn't impact the debt service numbers as they're laid out currently in the chart.
All right. I'm just telling you, I'm going to study this waterfall a little bit more, but my little simple math tells me $11 million for this project, $11 million for a roof, gives us $3 million left on total capital projects for the Board of Education over the next 5 years. Hope everyone understands that. That's where we're going. And if this project turns out to be more than that, we're going to have a problem.
I think that what you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of that's the power of the waterfall chart. And what you need to also factor in is when the money is bonded. And all 11 million for the ward roof is not going to be bonded at one time.
Okay?
Go ahead.
I think it's critical. I know we've talked about it, and I know I absolutely support Mr. Flynn coming in, because I think we need to sit with that tool and actually take the numbers. I think just as a request, besides actually having the waterfall, it would be helpful to have some of the other supporting numbers and to look at it, because as we go forward and look at anything further for Riverfield, since that's the topic we're on right now, we want to understand exactly how it fits. And obviously, for Selectmen and the Chief Fiscal Officer and folks at the Board of Ed have had lots of conversations about this, but I think for this board, I would just ask for that kind of supporting backup to go with the waterfall when we review it.
That makes sense. Any further questions on the $250,000?
No.
All right, we've already gone to the public on that? Ms. McCarthy-Vahey.
I think just a comment, since this is an opportunity for us to have some dialogue with the building committee members, and just appreciate that, just kind of echoing what the first selectman said, that I feel that way, and I won't speak for Mr. Walsh, but I sense that he does as well, that as much back and forth and even informal communication as well is very welcome and appreciated, since obviously every dollar is going to be scrutinized, so I know that you'll be doing that too, and thank you.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I mean, I support the project being done there. I'm just going to have to wait and see what happens with the numbers when they come back, because, I mean, I'm starting to get very nervous with some of the numbers that are coming in for that ward roof at $11 million. This is at 11. If it comes in significantly more than that, we have window projects coming up, and I think we have to, as a board, when these numbers come back and deciding it, we have to look at all of it as a whole.
Yes.
And if we have to put the brakes on some part of a project somewhere, or postpone a project, we're going to have to do that.
And Mr. Walsh, that's exactly the power of the waterfall chart. It becomes a great tool for managing just what you're pointing out.
Mhm.
I would point out that the ward roof bids did come back. They were open last week, and they're in the $6 million ballpark. So,
That's great.
Came up with some initial dollar amounts considerably lower than what we were planning, so that helps in that respect. But we do have enough other projects on the plate so that your point's still very valid, so don't,
At some point, if we could, maybe in another meeting when that's discussed, talk about how something's coming in for half the price we were told it was going to cost, that'd be a good conversation to have.
yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think it's some of the estimates that were used, and some of the contractors bid for less in terms of dollars per square foot, and wasn't much difference between doing it in 2, 3, or 4 years. Surprisingly enough, in terms of the total cost of the project. But
Now, just as we've asked, this board's asked before why numbers double the other way. I think we should ask why they get cut in half the others, so that when we're making decisions at this table, we have accurate figures to base them off. Great.
we'll do that. All right, are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Mr. Quinn, go get him. And Mr. Quinn, also just kind of part of the ongoing dialogue, if your building committee be good enough to track how that money is spent as part of that initial 250, so that we can use that as a cycle of learning as we address other building committees going forward, that would be greatly appreciated.
We'll work through the finance department to do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, next up, the Osborne Hill Building Committee charge to approve a building committee charge for the Osborne Hill windows. I am, here it is.
Does anybody else want a copy?
All right, I believe we were both copying on this email earlier. This was simplistically tweaked based on prior building committee charges, so this is the kind of first time we're discussing it. Any, and all comments are welcome and appreciated.
Well, I'll move it for discussion purposes. We haven't done the,
Okay, second?
Second.
All right, all,
so, okay.
discussion, go right ahead.
I guess the first question, Mike, I have is maybe there's a reason for it. I thought we had talked about maybe doing both this and the Ludlow project as together, maybe as one building committee, trying to get some type of economies of scale in both ordering and maybe not have to have two separate building committees and things like that. Is there a reason why we're now going to this being its own building committee?
Yes. Simply put, we definitely had that discussion. In fact, we had the further discussion saying, what's the best combination path? Should it be the Windows connection between this and Ludlow? Or should it be the Ludlow connection between a potential Ludlow renovation and a Ludlow Windows project?
Mm-hmm.
More specifically, would people be interested in being on a combo Windows project, or is in fact the bonding part of that, if you will, the emotional bonding part, not the financial bonding part, the school connection? So the thought was to get this off the ground, get it started. The Ludlow windows will be coming back to us at some point, but there's some testing that still has to be finished up on that, so that the size of that project is defined. This originally was a $750,000 project, fairly small by what the Ludlow Windows project might be. So finding people to serve on this from Osborne Hill might be simpler. And then at some point possibly going back to this group. And again, that's why the membership definition was not less than 5, not more than 11. The only reason for bringing it up that high was that if we chose to combine this with Ludlow, we'd have enough members to bring that back in and do that. And I don't know whether we'd actually, the option would be available to either set up different committees but have common membership. So some people might drop out when Osborne Hill's done, some people might continue on when Ludlow's done, but we'd have the benefit of both. But given the difficulty we've had in getting membership for building committees, the idea was to get this one started and kind of rolling sooner rather than later. And also because once we form this committee, we've met one of the criteria for getting the okay for state reimbursement, which is why we broke this out from the non-recurring package to start with.
Okay.
So I guess a long way of saying, I don't think we're cutting that off at any point, but it seemed more complicated and perhaps cumbersome to try and get that all approved at this point.
In regards to, I guess it'll be coming back to us for funding, if we approve them?
Very definitely, because we carved out the $750,000, as you remember, from non-recurring. That dollar amount has not been approved by anybody yet, so that would have to come back to us. And the Board of Selectmen did that, so it didn't get past us. Ms. McCarthy-Bate?
Just as a follow-up, through you to Mr. Morbido, because I did make that motion at the Board of Selectmen and was interested when I heard Mr. Collins say that there were potentially economies of scale that could be achieved doing the Windows projects at the same time. So I guess to that question, if you would be willing to give me a little bit of latitude, what's the status of the Ludlow window project? Where do things stand in terms of testing? And does it still hold true that there could be economies of scale?
Yeah, Mr.
That
Borambito,
can
would
be
you
achieved.
be kind enough to come up to the mic? And even though we all know you, please identify yourself
No,
again.
the public doesn't. I'm Sal Morbido, Manager of Construction for the Board of Education. The question is economy of scale if both Ludlow windows and Osborne windows were put out to bid at the same time.
That's one of my questions.
That's one
That was
question.
one of my questions.
Okay, I'll answer that one first. There could be if the timing allows that. I'm not sure that that'll happen, which is your second question, where is the testing? Testing right now for Fairfield Ludlow High School windows is ongoing in its second phase of testing. They did their initial sampling that we all know about. They found certain things that they have to go back and reinvestigate or take more samples deeper into the brick to see how much the PCBs migrated into the backup materials. That's ongoing now. I would expect, Mr. Fryer's running that job, but I know that they were doing a lot of sampling prior to vacation, during vacation, and I'm not sure, I don't have an update if they're done taking all their sampling, but that should be wrapping up soon if it hasn't. Probably take a month to get the laboratory results and a written report, so we're probably looking towards the end of May or early June for that written report to say, yes, we've defined it down to this half dozen or dozen windows. You have to cut the brick back 6 inches and you'll take care of your problems. So we don't have that information. Osborne Hill is much closer to being ready to move down the pike. Initial testing showed very little material that has to be followed up on, and that'll be followed up. I don't have a written report on that. That's due this week. And the follow-up is just on much less material, so it'll turn around much quicker. Not as much physical sampling to do at the site.
May I follow up on that?
Go ahead.
When you say much less material to follow up on, can you define that more?
Ludlow's
specifically?
huge. There's 900 windows where Osborne might have 60 to 80. They found there's many more eras of construction at Ludlow, so there's different types of materials that they have to test, various renovations, so there's a different history to the building. Osborne Hill is much more consistent. There's basically 2 areas of construction, the original construction and an addition that was done some 15 years ago. They know where they've tested it. It's very consistent, the material, so they've done that initial testing. They've only verbally told me that they found 2 openings that they need to go back on to take additional sampling, and the rest of the building is in good shape as far as that PCBs into the masonry. So it's moving along quicker. It's a smaller building.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at specifically. So were there also some PCBs found in the windows at Osborne Hill that you know of at this point?
Verbally, I was told that there was some. I don't know the reading levels. I'm expecting a report this week.
So you're still waiting for the more specific definitive
I'm waiting for the
information?
report, yes.
Okay. From a timing standpoint, if I remember correctly, the window process takes a while because of the ordering and all that. So if you're saying that you're getting a report back this week from Osborne, and verbally you are anticipating that there's not going to be the same level of follow-up at Ludlow, but
Right.
potentially some, you don't know yet.
Right.
And it may be another month, say, if I'm hearing right, for the Ludlow follow-up
At least.
labs to come, at least a month. What, is there anything detrimental to waiting to do those together? To get back to Mr. Walsh's point, which is kind of what I had talked about before in terms of
Economy of scale.
working this all together. We're doing all these windows, and yes, they're very, very different buildings, but we're ordering windows, we're going to bid windows, we're going to do all that together, or we could do all that together, and what's the downside of waiting a little bit longer
Of waiting?
for Osborne to wait for that testing results to get back from Ludlow?
You want to, the question is wait on Ludlow? For the Osborne or
No, it
vice
sounds
versa?
like Osborne, we
Uh,
hear we have a charge for Osborne.
Mhm.
And in other words, to Mr. Walsh's point of doing the Osborne and Ludlow windows together, and putting aside Mr. Tetra's comment that it may not make the most sense, but just, if we could kind of go with
If
My
you
that.
comment
could.
was, just to be clear, was about the building committee, not about ordering the windows together. We could have 4 different building committees, but still take advantage of economies of scale by how we order it.
That's
So
possible.
the question is,
That's
from a
possible.
bidding standpoint, if I can,
Good, yes.
Osborne Hill's a smaller project, we've got a charge, we've got an ed spec, we're ready to roll. Ludlow's still, we're trying to define what the project is because we haven't got any testing back.
Correct.
In order to take advantage, to the common question, of economies of scale of this window project and the Ludlow larger window project, and since assuming the larger one actually generates the economies that we're trying to take advantage of on the smaller project,
Mhm.
do we have to bid them together? Do we have to wait on Osborne until Ludlow's ready to go to bid so we can bid them together to take advantage of those economies of scale?
What worried me with that is that the Ludlow windows could be lagged so far behind that you really miss a sweet spot in the bidding opportunity. Probably the best time to bid these windows, would probably be around Christmas, given the lead time to get to a summer project. Taking into account that you have to get an architect and get bid documents together, waiting for Ludlow would really compress that. So I'm not sure if you would hit next summer, not this coming summer, the following school, the summer 13.
But
So-
if I hear what you're saying, there's a few months between now and Christmas. There's
Right.
certainly enough time to evaluate what the economies of scale would be in terms of waiting if needed. So we can get started on this, but not necessarily go out to bid, because it sounds like we don't have to do that before Christmas to meet.
That would be-
We've missed this summer, so we're really talking a
Yeah,
a
you
year from
definitely
now.
missed this summer for either one of the projects, just because the windows take a good
So we have time to
16 to
get
20 weeks.
more information back from you and Mr. Cullen about what those economies might be and to see how much sense it makes to coordinate those projects.
Right.
It also says we don't necessarily need to run out and form our building committee right away. And one of the reasons for doing this was to make sure that we got on the docket for getting state reimbursement. Besides this charge, what else do we have to have in place to be on the docket for state reimbursement?
To file a project for reimbursement, you need a ed spec, a building committee charge,
And I thought funding approval.
and you have to have the funding
Okay.
and the additional resolutions prepared
Yeah,
documents
yeah.
level.
But that's more administrative. To get the funding approval, do we need to have that funding approval done by the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, or do we have from now to Christmas to do that?
For a window project, it's not cut off at the June 30th. It's a non-priority project is what, there's 2 types of project for BSF. There's a priority project and a non-priority. It's a non-priority, there's no timeline. We file it when we're ready.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did anybody have questions?
So just one more
Kristen?
before you sit down, if I,
Sure.
there, in the reading of the project rationale, there's the 3 different timelines for construction, the 1997 expansion. And am I correct in assuming, based on reading the remainder of the document, that those 1997 windows are not going to be replaced in this project?
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. So it's simply the 1958 and the 1969 windows
Correct.
are what's, didn't want to assume.
Yes.
So standing here today, your best estimate is that the Osborne Hill windows will be put in 2013, and Ludlow will be done in 2014 summers?
It's possible, we don't have, without having the reports back, it's a little bit hard to say that timeline. Is it
Mhm.
possible Ludlow is a multi-year project.
Okay.
No matter what.
Mhm.
I would be hopeful to be able to get it in line so that a portion of it is done in the summer of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
possibly even before, that it's such a unique building and so much space, it's possible that it has multiple phases, maybe something over the school vacation, 1 week vacations too. So it's hard to say. Thank you.
In regards to the charge, I have a question, Mike, in regards to the drafting of it. It says 5 and not more than 11. This brings us back to the report that we had from the committee that looked at how building committees should be formed and operated, which again recommended, I think the quote was more than 7. And we talked about this the last time, and at that time, we had more, we're doing it because we had a certain number of members, and we were going to add some later on and things like that, but I'm wondering whether we should just change that now, have the higher number of people.
I think the thought in leaving it at 5, or making it 5 as opposed to higher, was that this is Windows, and it's relatively, if it's just Osborne Hill, if we don't combine it with the Ludlow project, then this lets us get that started. It doesn't require us to have more. If we're going to expand this to include Ludlow, certainly we'd, I think, end up somewhere closer to the 11 members on doing that. As this originally came to us without a building committee, it was really going to be handled as a large maintenance project out of the central office at that time. So that was the thought.
All right, it just, I know it's a small project, but to be consistent with that, it just seems as though if we're going to, we just seem to continually thumb our nose at it in a way, because it has a recommendation of it. In the last 2 charges, we at least put the original charge out without those numbers being in line with that report.
Yeah, I think we put Riverfield out with 7 to 11 initially, or 7 to 9 originally.
Yeah,
I think, and we tweaked that right at from the get-go. I think if you go back and read the report, that was evaluating projects that were considerably more complicated and larger in size than the Ward Roof project or than the Osborne Hill windows. But again, I don't mean to draw a line in the sand on that. If you wanted to make an amendment to increase this, I may not be in favor of that, but I'm not necessarily opposed to it. So.
Just to, maybe through you to Mrs. Ewing or Mrs. Iacono, Chairman of the Board of Ed, how many members currently sit on the Special Projects Standing Building Committee?
I believe 7. It's 7.
7, oh, yes.
So you
There's
said,
someone else here who
you
knows.
said there are 7 members on that standing, and that's the Sherman School Project Building Committee, for a
That's
nickname,
correct.
if you will.
And in
No.
the past, Pam Iacono, Chairman of the Board of Ed, former member of the Special Projects Building Committee. In the past, Special Projects has handled window projects like this. They handled Riverfield, and I'm not sure what else.
I think was Holland Hill one of those at one point?
No, Holland Hill did not receive reimbursement.
Right.
Light did. Light did.
But normally, that was, because that was a standing building committee, and you need the building committee to get the state reimbursement, we handled all of that kind of stuff. But obviously, they're tied up with the Sherman project. So I don't know that that's something you want to send to them. I know they have their hands full right now.
Yeah, I think from that group of people, I would concur that Sherman is both very complex and being handled by 7 folks. From our board standpoint, in terms of the number, literally, it just seemed to me that this project was simpler than certainly the Sherman project or some of the more complex projects we had. 5 seemed to be a reasonable number, but if it was the wish of this board to amend that, certainly don't have a problem with that. If we do keep it at 5, I would suggest we also add in here a phrase about the quorum, which is typically on building committees 4 members. And I would think if it were 5, we'd have to make it 51% or 4 members, whichever is less. And again, because this is 5 to 11, we can add members as we did to Riverfield, if we choose to. So any amendments to this? or thoughts?
Just a couple of comments. I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, that this is a way for us to get started with the window project that's most likely, from what Mr. Morabito's saying, closer in the pipeline.
Yeah, we came at it, because we carved this out of the non-recurring budget, one of the requests I heard, and I forget exactly who said it, was, how quickly can we get this back through, because we didn't want to lose the opportunity. We also wanted to make sure we got the reimbursement to go through these steps. It's taking enough time. I don't know if we would have hit this summer's window anyway, but we're definitely not going to hit it now. So we have time to take advantage of thinking through this if we're not ready to vote on it today. We have time to get further information from Mr. Morabito, Mr. Cullen, and central office as to how we can coordinate the Ludlow and Winters project, how much economy of scale there is. I think and it sounds like we're not going to go for applying for reimbursement, Mr. Morabito, on this session anyway. We do it next center. As you said, it's kind of a rolling issue with a maintenance project like this, so we're not under the constraint of trying to get this done by the end of June legislative session.
Correct.
So we have plenty of time to address this or get our questions answered. Miss-
So,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just threw you to either the chairman of the Board of Ed or Mr. Morabito.
If you'd be kind enough.
We're giving you your exercise today. Just, do you have an opinion or a preference in terms of whether, what I'm looking at is, okay, I can say yes to this today, and if I say yes to this today, what I'd like to see is the option of, if it makes sense as time goes by, to put the Ludlow windows with it and do it together. Also, just from an organizational standpoint, for our having staff, having volunteers, having our purchasing department, Mr. Morabito, just meetings to attend. So do you have a thought or an opinion on?
I can give you my personal opinion. We haven't talked about it as a board, so I can't speak on behalf of them, but it seems to me to make sense that you'd be able to somehow combine them. It'd be nice if you were able to establish the committee now and then add to that charge at some point in the Ludlow piece of it. Or maybe you're going to find that because we're moving forward with an addition request at Ludlow, that you want to keep it separate, but you want to have the two committees working together with one another. But it would be good if you got this moving with the understanding of that it's possible that they would be handling the Ludlow window project as well. That's my personal opinion. It makes sense to me. But I don't want to do anything to hold up. It takes the reason why we brought this forward now is because it takes so long in the process to get the windows moving. So I don't want to do anything to hold that up. And we knew that because this was a little bit later if you remember, in our long-term plan. But we knew in order to meet our long-term plan goal, we had to ask for it now, just because all of the different steps take so long to get through.
Follow-up question? No. All right, any thoughts on whether we want to take action on this now or postpone it to some point?
I am, as Ms. Iacona just indicated, I tend to agree with that philosophy. I think this is a place for us to start, and we then have the ability to amend, add, adjust this depending on the other projects coming forward. But this is one that we know is coming, and we talked about this before. And in terms of the 5, not more than 11, I will say that I am more comfortable with the number of 7. I don't, just in terms of the practicality of appointing people on a quorum, I think that has been sometimes an issue for the other committee. So, though I don't know that I feel the need to amend it, I think I just want to make sure we get to that number through those we appoint to this committee.
Okay, so you're offering guidance as opposed to an amendment?
Legislating, yes.
Okay. Mr. Walsh, any edits, thoughts, or suggestions from your standpoint on this?
No, I just want to move forward with it. And to the extent that there's going to be a separate committee, I don't think either committee should have to report to the other. It's just going to waste time. Those building committees should not have to report to each other. They should work independently. We're going to have two separate building committees, let them go off. One shouldn't delay the other and all this other stuff. If that's the way it's going to be, it's either going to have one committee for both or two separate committees. Let's not there be confusion and say chairman's got to get together and then there's got to be joint meetings and you're slowing us down and you're the reason for our delay and all this other stuff. It's just like, let them go.
Yeah.
If this building committee gets first and gets moving, let's get them moving and go. And just Godspeed.
Yeah. I think that one, to your point, there's two more milestones on this project. One is getting the committee approved, and one is getting money approved, because no dollars have been approved yet for this. Two, the Ludlow project being much longer would extend longer than this. One of the thoughts on two separate committees would be that Osborne Hill will get done, and Ludlow will continue to go on for a few years after that. So, but we can revisit that as we do this. So, and if we go up to 7 members, then having a quorum and if that's the consensus of the body, happy to leave it at this, but go back and recommend we get to 7 when we do that. So unless somebody feels we have to edit this or modify this, have we gone to the public yet for comment? Jen, did we go to the public yet for this?
No.
Anybody from the public want to comment on the resolution before us?
I just want to add one other thing for your consideration. It's so hard to find people to serve on these committees. So I think you ought to leave open the possibility of combining the two building committees if it's just going to be on windows. Because it's so hard to find people to serve, and these people are going to have the knowledge of what works with windows. So I just think
Thank
you
you.
should keep that in mind.
It would seem to be, one, we're not locking that out at this point.
Right.
To Mr. Walsh's point, we have the ability to go back and basically, and I'd have to check this to see whether we can have two different building committees with some overlapping membership. And I'd have to go back and check the rules.
But I
and
do
regs.
agree that you shouldn't have chairmans having to,
Yeah,
make the call of who's in charge of
Too much
what.
coordination and kind of
Right.
too many different issues and that thing. So certainly
Right. And I just want to be clear,
Important
my thoughts
consideration.
on a separate building committee would be as if the project moves forward for the addition at Ludlow and have them encapsulate things there. But that's a long way off the path, so.
Okay.
Although that request did come into the first selectman's office. Thank you.
all right. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Any follow-up discussion before we vote?
I have no interest in having the Osborne windows being held up. It's simply the practical matter of if, as time goes by, it works out to fold that other project in. I have absolutely zero interest in two chairmen having to coordinate and communicate with each other, just to clarify. I don't want to do that.
All right. Mr. Walsh, any follow-up comments? You ready to vote?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. May I have a motion to approve the refunds from the tax collector?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And now we have a private executive session with the town attorney concerning pending litigation. I have a motion to go in private executive session.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Jerry. If you could make sure all that is appropriately turned off.
Yeah, I'll cut this part out.
All right, may I have a motion to come back into public session?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I just want to comment that in private executive session, no motions were made and no votes were taken. That being said, we're at the end of our agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I gotta run.